I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that reduces the risk and costs of cross-border transactions. As a board member, there are few better feelings than making a suggestion which adds quick material value to your organisation. I remember when one of our board members saved us $50,000 with a quick introduction to a group discount scheme for one of our key suppliers. I continue to feel grateful to this day. Alt21 can offer exactly this kind of quick win for board members. By using their foreign exchange and hedging services, you could reduce your company's costs by 90%. For a company that has just 10 million foreign exchange exposure through its revenues or cost base, that could be over $300,000 back into the business. All21 are so confident that they offer the best value in the market, they show you how much they make from fees in real time before and after any transaction. If you want to save your organisation money on its foreign exchange and hedging, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Nurole, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Nurole, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Sir Douglas Flint CBE, is chairman of abrdn PLC and is the former group chairman of HSBC Holdings PLC, having previously served as Group Finance Director. He is also chairman of IP Group PLC, which commercialises science predominantly out of UK universities, and the Royal Marsden Hospital and Charity. Sir Douglas has served on a number of other major boards, including as Non-Executive Director of BP PLC and Chairman of the Institute of International Finance. He was awarded a CBE in 2006 for services to the finance industry and was knighted in 2018 for services to banking. Sir Douglas, a huge welcome and thank you for being here.
It's a great pleasure. Great pleasure.
In a previous podcast I listened to whilst researching for this episode, you talked about how much you've learned from the chairs you've worked with. Could you talk us through the most valuable thing you learned from each of those chairs, and perhaps for each give an example that brings what you learned to life?
I mean, I worked for 5 chairmen, 3 at HSBC, 2 at BP. They were all very different. Willie Purvis was an absolute legendary chairman. And his grasp of detail was extraordinary. I mean, he knew everything about everything to the finest detail. And again, one of the lessons of that was that when you go into a meeting and you're the chairman, you don't necessarily need to be executive. He was executive. But if you've got detailed facts, people come in much better prepared. Because if they know that they're coming into an environment where the chairman is appraised of the situation, he's not learning from the board discussion, he's already ahead of the board discussion, and therefore he will expect other people to have got themselves properly briefed. I think that gets to better board discussion because people recognize the responsibility they've got to get themselves adequately prepared before they come into the room. Other chairs were brilliant at building consensus. Some chairs were great at being just legendary, and therefore people never kind of questioned. Others were just as good at getting to the right answer, but did it through building consensus. Peter Sutherland was an unbelievable chairman at BP. He had got a supersonic intellect, but a wicked sense of humor. And when you're dealing with difficult things, humor is not a bad thing to just lighten the load sometimes a little bit for people when they're dealing with something that's really quite difficult. And he was a master of it. But you can only be yourself. I mean, you can't play in the style of somebody else. And if you try and play in the style of somebody else, you'll fail because you're not that person. But you can observe, you can learn, you can sort of say, in those circumstances, I would have gone a different way. I'd have tried to build consensus before I asked the question, or I would have been more forceful in sort of saying this is the direction we have to go to if things were rambling around a subject.
You also talked about, I think, Peter Sutherland at BP, who you said was particularly good at building consensus. What was his method that you thought was so effective?
I think that he engaged everybody. If it was a complicated issue, he would make sure that everybody had an opportunity to come at the question from a different angle, so that everybody could hear where other people were coming from, as opposed to having a directed view that was the executive view or whatever. It was making sure that everyone who had a different view, or was likely to have a different view, or would come at it from a different perspective, perhaps risk or so on, was able to say, what's the risk, the audit perspective of that? What's the perspective from a different business group that would have to give up resources for us to do this? And therefore, it was, again, making sure that people felt they were adequately informed. I think the worst thing or one of the worst things in a board is that you make a decision and people get to the coffee machine and say, I didn't really think we had the information to do that, or I didn't really agree with that, but I didn't want to put my hand up and say I don't agree with it, because it seemed that everyone else was on board. And then the person they're talking to says, well, wasn't really very comfortable either. And that's horrible. I mean, you may end up in a situation where not everybody agrees. You try and avoid that. But you want to end up in a situation with those that don't agree. Let's hope it's less than 20% by number. So to say, it's not where I'd have gone, but I respect the majority, and all the things that concern me were on the table. Take another example from my own experience. I mean, we looked at acquiring in a particular country where HSBC wasn't present at that moment. Half the board was quite enthusiastic about it, and half the board was vehemently against it. I mean, it was almost 50-50, because from their own experience in other businesses they'd been part of, they'd either had a very good experience or a really terrible experience. And we actually didn't take it forward for a whole bunch of financial reasons at the end of the day, but it would have been very difficult to go forward when you've got really strongly held views based on experience. And therefore, when we had the first discussion on it, we basically said, right, we need to do a lot more work, because we can't make a decision when we've got such divergent views, and well-constructed divergent views based on experience. But it was a complicated situation.
And so in that situation, as a chair, do you then go and work with board members individually and have discussions with them individually? Do you get the executive to go off and do more work to get that information and then come back as a group?
I think you ask the executive to go and get more information and effectively, have an A case and a B case. I mean, I used to use a framework, still do, where you've got a complicated decision, and you sort of say, if you were to go down route A, you would need to believe the following, and then ask people to sort of score each of the statements on a sort of a 1 to 5. 1, absolutely agree with it. 5, don't agree with it at all. 3, kind of neutral. And then if I were to go to option B, I would need to believe the following, and how strongly you believe it. Because you sometimes get decisions where people say, well, it's pretty obvious that we would increase our sales if we did the following thing, or there's a market penetration here that we can capture. And then, but when you ask them to say, okay, that's an assertion, how confident are you in it that it's true? And there are lots of things that people want to believe are true, but when you ask them to kind of say, do you really believe that, strongly believe it, kind of believe it, you're not quite sure, and so on, you tend to find people coming to well, I kind of believe it, but I can't evidence it. And then they begin to shape in their own mind, because ideally, again, you want people to come to a decision that they have made in their own mind, not that they're following a crowd. You want everyone bought into every decision, even if they didn't agree with it, in a sense, but they bought into it because they've heard the other arguments and accept that their view has been respected, but isn't the majority view. But what you don't want is people kind of going, I don't think we were in a position to make that decision. We simply didn't. The case wasn't well made, but someone decided, we want to do it. CEO wants to do it, chairman wants to do whatever, and all of a sudden we've done it, and we're now looking back at our shoes and going, how did we get there?
I love that framework, and it echoes what Professor Stanislav Szczekśnia talked about in episode 109 what he called the Norwegian model, where he encouraged chairs to think about not only what must be true, but how might we be wrong. I'm curious, what other frameworks are there like that you use regularly as a chair that really enhance the way the board works? Because that's a gem.
Well, that's the main one because it seems to work well. I think the other framework is separating the strategic from the operational. I mean, every financial plan is only a single point on a spectrum. And I think that, and the same with any business case where you say we're going to acquire something or set up a business. I think people can spend, and the business case always gets to an answer that's above the cost of capital. But it's only one point on a spectrum. So I always think that there are two elements. One is the strategic element. Why do we want to do this? Is it defensive? Is it aggressive? Is it for the future? Because many deals, acquisitions will be almost for the next generation. If you start a business in China, if you open a new market in South America, it's unlikely to come to fruition in 5 years or something. It's going to be your successor or your successor's successor. So, I think it's important to sort of say, why are we doing this? I mean, is it the right thing strategically to do? Secondly, can we afford to do it? Have we got the money that would allow us to do it? And what's the risk? Are we risking the company? If it goes wrong, does the company blow up? No, okay. And then what are the mitigants? If things don't work out the way that we hope they will work out and the way that's expressed in the kind of the base business case, what are the levers we can pull to change performance? I mean, I think that's most important in business plans. I get very strongly engaged with business plans that are presented to the board in the sense that, people say, well, we've got a plan for next year. We're going to make a profit of 102.6. And you go, really? Wow, I wish I could be that accurate. And you kind of go, the base case is 102.6. What are the triggers that would cause us to do things to protect that ambition? What are the things we would do that say, the market, the world is so challenging at the moment, we're going to hunker down, we're not going to take as much exposure, as much risk, and we're going to accept the fact that maybe we're only going to make 80, but that's a better number because if we stretch for 102, we could end up in all sorts of trouble. So what are the triggers that would make us change our mind on the number, and what would we do either to protect the number, or what would we do to articulate to the marketplace that their expectations are wrong because the world has changed. We've got wars, we've got invasions, we've got cost of living crisis. There are things that are happening today that we didn't know about when we set a plan. And I think people who get obsessed about a number and a plan are doing themselves a disservice because life isn't like that. You go out on a golf course and you hope to score par, but it doesn't work like that. At least that doesn't for me.
We've talked a lot about the chair role. I'd love to dive into some specific case studies now, because I think they're always so instructive, and you've had some incredible experiences. The first situation I'd like to talk about was from your time on the board of BP, where you were a NED from 2005 until 2011, and you left shortly after the BP Macondo oil spill, and when Tony Hayward, the then BP CEO, stepped down, when you went on to take up your role as chair of HSBC. That must have been an extraordinarily challenging period to be a board member. What have been your reflections and lessons learned from that period?
Oh, many. I took on the chair of the audit committee at the beginning of 7-8 days before the spill, and indeed Carl Henrik became chair 7-8 days before the spill. So it was a year of, I don't know, with 40 odd board meetings. I think, and I had similar experiences at HSBC in different ways. I think the most humbling thing on a board is to find yourself in a situation where everything you believed about a company's risk framework control didn't operate in the way that you thought it was. So you're learning things about yourself that you never thought you were going to have to learn because you thought all these things were well managed. And the amount of introspection that BP did was incredible. And to this day, no one will ever understand the actual pattern of events that led to the blowout, because I'll get the numbers wrong, but there were somewhere between 8 and 12. There would have been 8 or 12 warning signals on the rig at the time that would have said something's going really, really wrong. And there were, 8 or 10 ways that you could close everything down, none of which were taken. And yet the guy running the rig was the trainer of trainers for the company operator. He was the most experienced operator that the company had. So you learn. You also learn that, I think one of the biggest lessons BP learned, and they've said this publicly, was that because you're in a situation where you're under a severe challenge, politically and litigation potentially, that there are things that you can't talk about because they're sub judice, and therefore the constituency that needs to be protected and it feels very vulnerable is your own employees. Your own employees are being told in the media, this is a company that put monetary reward ahead of safety. And they go, that's not the company I joined. And yet that's what they read in the papers. And how do you bring people back to the view that that is not the correct view without making a statement that gets public where you just increase the antagonism of the media towards you, saying you guys aren't prepared to admit the fact that something horrible happened, and something horrible happened, and 11 people lost their lives. So that was an introspection, and the fact that you were having to build relationships again with your bondholders, your shareholders, your regulators, governments, your employees, non-government organizations that all had a dramatic shift in the way they perceived the company that historically had been perceived as among the best in the world at what it did, because it was. And I actually believe that I wouldn't like to engineer one, but I actually believe that until a company's been through almost an existential threat, and individuals on boards have been through that, companies never are as good as they could be, and individuals are never as good as they could be. Now, I had some advantage in that board, that having been on HSBC, that had its own moments in the sun. You're kind of going, I've not had this experience, but I've had similar experiences of things happening that you weren't aware of, and the question, should you be aware of, and so on and so forth. So it was, and again, you then get, as in all these situations, the non-executives sort of take a higher profile role because they've got to work out whether they can rely on the executive in the way that they used to, because something's happened that shouldn't have happened, and you've got to spend a bit of time working out whether some of the more lurid allegations about prioritization are actually true or not. They weren't true, but you've got to, if it were the case that money was the only criteria and other things were put to one side, then you would have to really question whether you had the right people. That wasn't the case. But in those situations, you have to sort of, dismiss the knee-jerk reaction that's probably coming from the media as to what went wrong and why it went wrong. And you've got to build a narrative that you can progressively begin to attract support again from external commentators who begin to learn more about what happened. And BP did that very well by being totally transparent and also upfront saying, we will pay whatever it takes to put things right for individuals that have suffered, for the families of those that lost their lives, and for the environment that was damaged by the incident. So there were some early steps taken, but it was quite an intense period, and I think the company learned a lot about itself during that period.
Pro bono roles can be hugely rewarding and give you valuable boardroom experience, but many people get stuck in the pro bono space. Without expert help to reposition your value for paid roles, you risk building years of experience that boards don't fully recognise. Nurole Plus gives you personal expert guidance to sharpen your story, demonstrate commercial board readiness, and open doors to paid opportunities. Head to plus.nurole.com to find out more. I think non-execs in many ways are put in an impossible situation. There's just no way you can know everything about an organisation. Is there anything others can learn from that experience that they might be able to apply on their own boards?
That's a good question. I don't know, because that particular event was a confluence of 7 or 8 things all happening independently. That the probability of 7 or 8 things all going wrong consecutively at the same time were infinitesimally small, but they happened. So it really is in your kind of on your risk analysis. It's that sort of tail event that couldn't happen, and I always used to when I was finance director at HSBC, challenge the teams to say, we're very confident that we get our numbers right and so on and so forth, but I'm going to give you a scenario that one day we wake up and there's a horrible error that's come to light. I want you all to write down where you think that could have come from. And what that did was force people to say, well, if there was an error, I bet it's over there, because I'm not sure about that guy, or there's that part of the business where we rely on an awful lot of inputs that we can't verify, whatever. So you sort of say there is an error. Where do you think it? And that forces people to think about things they're worried about. The safety events are. I think one of the most difficult questions, which has not got a good answer, that boards get asked by shareholders and so on, is, how comfortable are you can protect yourself from an aggressive cyber attack? The answer is you can do a lot, but you can't guarantee that if a state actor or a very well-resourced bad actor group decides to come after you, that they won't, get some traction, and therefore you sort of say, okay, so how do you make sure that whatever your secret sauce is for your recipe for Coca-Cola, is it the most protected thing in the organization that would be really difficult to get, as opposed to, the names and addresses of your caterers, and I think that kind of disaster recovery, extreme event scenario planning is useful for boards to do, to sort of say, what are the reputational risks that could destroy this company? Is it a health and safety event? Is it a massive fraud? Is it a stupid statement around how we think about our customers? What are the things that can, and therefore, what can we do? What can we do to protect yourself from that kind of event? And a lot of things you can do, a lot of things you can't do. But one of the things I think big companies often don't do as much as they should is make sure that they've built relationships with government, with the media, with regulators if they have them, so that people have got a perception of the integrity, the quality, the ethics of the organization before they've got an event where that has been tested. If you don't know the people and then something happens, you say these are bad people. If you know the people and you've got to know them and you think these are good people, and then something happens, you go, well, I think they're good people, but you're starting off without giving them benefit of the doubt, as opposed to saying, I never really knew these people, they're obviously bad.
That's interesting. So if you went back in time, it sounds like you would. One question you could ask was, have we built those relationships with those media and government organisations such that let's accept there is fat tail risk here. Something will at some stage go wrong. Let's make sure they really understand. We understand that risk. We're doing everything we can to mitigate it. But if it goes wrong, they are at least on board with the way we've approached this, and that they understand that there are some things you cannot mitigate against.
That's right. And I think you also want to, when you're making your assessment of where you want to do business and how you want to do business, there are some jurisdictions where making a mistake is much more expensive than other jurisdictions. The US would be one of them, because the legal system is punitive for error. And, you can argue that that's a good thing because it encourages people not to make mistakes. But it is an expensive place to make mistakes, and therefore, part of your risk assessment must be that if we make a mistake in country A, the consequences are this. If we make it in country B, the consequences are 10 times because of a legal system that will deal very differently. So, yes, yeah, and again, one of the questions that not just in the BP case, and I don't think it was, a lot of activity is subcontracted. But what it also tells you is that, you are responsible for the outcome. I mean, you chose the subcontractors. The subcontractors were the best in the world, but something happened. But yes, they have a responsibility, but ultimately you, as the engaging party, have the ultimate responsibility. You chose the person to conduct business for you.
I think one of the lasting memories in the sort of the public memory of that whole episode was that Tony Hayward interview where he said he just wanted his life back. I guess in situations like that, it can be deeply stressful and challenging for a CEO, and you're constantly under the microscope and it's easy to make a sort of a misstep. Do you think, again, going back in time as a board, you could have done anything differently to have helped the CEO through that experience that others listening might want to consider for their own executive team?
When you've got a really serious situation to deal with, the outside world really only wants to hear from the CEO and the chair. The chair was very, very new in post, so Tony probably took a larger share of the media outreach than might have happened in other circumstances. Tony's a friend. He did an amazing job. He was exhausted. He said something with hindsight he would never say again. And he took the consequences. In this world of social media where people are dredging out statements that were made 10 years ago in a pub, I think it's even worse than it was then. I do think you need to try and protect your spokespeople from, in situations that they're, if they're doing 10, 12, 15 interviews a day or getting caught, on the sidelines of things, it's really challenging. And, I think one of the lessons might well be to be more directive as to how many times people are going to have access, and journalists are journalists. They ask difficult questions, and they try and put you in a difficult position. I mean, I remember the lawyers saying to us that there are, when you're standing up in front of a Senate hearing, there are three objectives. One, for you to say something that is untrue so that they can come at you with criminal liability. Two, to expose you to saying something that opens liability far beyond your legal responsibility. And three, that you take the position that the only way to avoid that is to not answer the question and look like a knave and a fool. And often that's the best answer. Because, the consequences of getting tricked into saying something that you didn't realize the consequences of could be cataclysmic. But you may have to pay with that by, being evasive. I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not prepared to answer that question. So, I mean, and of course that doesn't play well in a media scenario. So it's one of the reasons I'd say that, being a chief executive is a lonely job, a difficult job, because you've got very few people that are your counselors, and which the most important probably is your chair. And I think part of the chair's role in the best companies is to give air cover to the chief executive, to put themselves between the chief executive and the outside world in situations where the individual's doing a good job and needs to be protected from the most aggressive questioning, and then you take the burden on his behalf and protect him. And I think that's what good chairs do, because otherwise, you're asking the individual who's the chief executive to do the job, and at the same time you're asking them to put themselves in the lion's den and answer questions when they may not know all the answers for his chair. You can say, I don't know all the answers, but I know I've got a really good person doing it. So, and I think, that's where chairs really can earn their corn, as it were, by giving air cover. And I think that's really important.
I'd like to move on and talk about a second case study, which relates to your time as chair of Aberdeen, where one of the most high-profile decisions was the rebrand from Standard Life Aberdeen to Aberdeen. Can we start by just going back to the first time the idea of changing the brand came to the board, and what was the strategic rationale and how was it framed?
Well, the trigger was very, very simple. I mean, what is now Aberdeen was the culmination of Standard Life Investments and Aberdeen Asset Management. Was the combination of Standard Life and then Aberdeen Asset Management, then Standard Life, the insurance company, was sold. And the company became Standard Life Aberdeen. But the Standard Life brand, while enormous heritage, 200 years, Standard Life started in 1825, enormous heritage. It was a heritage in insurance. And therefore, and having sold the insurance company to Phoenix, the brand had been licensed to them. So effectively, there could have been two Standard Lives in the marketplace in the UK. So that was complicated. And the Standard Life brand was insurance. And when I used to get letters from customers saying this has not been a very good experience, it tended to be about an insurance query, not about asset management. The dominant name in asset management was Aberdeen. But if you type Aberdeen with all the letters in it, you get the football club, you get the city, and you can't protect it, because it's a name that belongs to lots of things, and therefore you couldn't make it unique. Our funds, many of our funds were and still are listed on exchanges, abrdn, because they're listed with 4 or 5 letters, and therefore it was quirky. You've got more and more companies using kind of names that sound like something but are spelled differently. So it felt right. I think if we'd reflected further, we might have done more about what we realized afterwards. Once we saw one of the many memes that was taking the mickey out of us, there was Harold Vorderman on the countdown board. There's only one word that abrdn spells, which is brand. Wish we'd thought about that. Anyway, there are two views in the sort of the brand industry. One says, what a mess. The other says, oh my God, I have never seen anyone get more publicity for free. And, I would go to lunches and you'd go, who are you? I'm chairman of Aberdeen. That's abrdn, just in case you don't know how to spell it. People would laugh and smile. And it was a great, we were far better known than we would ever have been called something else. The brand was the concept of ABRDN was created internally. We then asked one of the well-known brand consultants to, if we were to do this, think of some alternatives. And I have to say the alternatives were not as good, because they didn't, in our view, play at all. So they were brand new, made up names, and you think, well, at least ABRDN, you can say you pronounce it Aberdeen, and therefore you know who we are. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. There was a certain amount of reaction. I mean, the media had a bit of fun. Some of our shareholders and customers, they couldn't, I think, in reality, get too excited about what you call, but they did get excited about the fact that you were in the papers all the time and being poked a little bit. And that's why we changed it eventually, because it was a distraction. It was too easy just to say, oh, you're that funny company without the vowels. For most of, we didn't actually market under that name, but it was a distraction. It was causing a certain amount of friction, and therefore, just when the new CEO came in, he said, "This is a distraction. I don't want. We'll change it," and we did, and we got the usual ha ha ha. I don't think I can think of any branding has gone away from a traditional name that hasn't been ridiculed. I mean, Aviva was massively ridiculed, and now we take it as it's an iconic name. And PwC were going to call a consulting firm Monday, weren't they? Whether these are good ideas or bad ideas, I don't know. But everyone likes to sort of say, well, I don't understand that. So it was a bold strategy.
And did you have a pre-mortem on what if it backfires discussion at the board?
No, we thought they would attract a certain amount of comment. I think it was more intense than we imagined. We couldn't, I think, probably quite understand why people were so excited about it. I mean, you could protect it. You could register the brand ABRDN. One of the good things about it is if you click on a fund management portal and sort of say, list me all the funds that do this, Aberdeen comes up first because it's AB. That's quite good. There were a lot of positives, and as I said, we don't. So no, there wasn't a what if it, but we had to change because we couldn't keep with the Standard Life brand because it was duplicative. And we decided that going to the full Aberdeen name was, well, two things really. One, you couldn't protect it, and if you type it into a search engine, you don't get the fund management company. And also, it was trying to move on from two different heritages to a new company. I mean, that was one of the benefits that, and that was one of the real positives, is that while you were Standard Life Aberdeen, there were people in the organisation that kind of identified themselves. Well, I'm part of the Standard Life piece, and I'm part of the Aberdeen piece. Whereas when you've got a new name, you're all part of the same, and that was very successful.
But so, what finally convinced you to revert? Because I guess there, as you said, like Aviva and others held the course, and eventually it just becomes normal, and the overreaction dies out. Why did you not hold that course, and what was it? Was there unanimity about changing back?
We changed CEO in an orderly succession, and he said, "Look, there's a lot to do. This is a distraction. We're still getting commentary, which is frustrating to some of our customers and shareholders who say, why are you guys always in the media? And you're mostly in the media because someone's having a pop at the name. He said, let's just take the hit and change it back. And I think when you could challenge that view and say, well, we could run it, and I'm sure we could have done, but if the person that you've asked to run the business says, look, this is a distraction, I would rather not have it. It's a perfectly legitimate view. You support the CEO.
So if you're advising a board member listening today who's on the board of an organisation facing a major rebranding decision like that, what advice would you offer them?
There's lots of people very, very skilled in branding, and very few of them sit on boards because most people will have done it at the most once or twice in their careers. There are names and there are brands. I mean, BMW is a brand in the sense that BMW could produce sportswear or training shoes or luggage, and people would buy it because they say if BMW is putting the name on it, it'll be well engineered, it will be quality, it will last a long time, it will be expensive, and people will think you're the sort of person that buys BMW stuff. You couldn't put the Aberdeen brand on anything other than wealth and fund management. We couldn't produce trainers or popsicles or anything else. To me, a brand is something that can translate across from its primary relationship, so BMW, Nike, all these sort of things, you can add them, not just training shoes, it can be sports kit, it can be whatever. In the financial services industry, the biggest names can move into other aspects of financial services, but people wouldn't buy, I don't think, HSBC luggage or HSBC training shoes. I mean, they'd go, what's that got to do with anything? It's a brand that works very well in financial services, but it doesn't extend. Whereas BMW, you could probably have a BMW credit card. And people would, because it would create an association. So I think you've got to think about what it is that you're trying to, what it is you're trying to convey with whatever you have as your brand. Is it a name that's unique to you that you can protect? And if that's the case, are you prepared to spend the amount of money to promote it and protect it that you would need to do? Is it trying to convey the values of the organization? If that's the case, that's a really difficult thing to do, because there's always someone who's going to say that these aren't my values if you tie it to some particular word. I mean, it's a lot easier if you've got heritage because it speaks for itself. I basically say, if you don't have to do it, don't do it.
So Douglas, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm not very good at this, so you'll have to be gentle with me.
Best book every board member should read?
Letters from the Chairman. Ace Greenberg at Bear Stearns wrote a book. It was either emails or letters from the Chairman. It's absolute. You can read it in a single flight from London to Edinburgh. It's genius.
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
Looking at your phone.
What's a boardroom myth you think needs busting?
That directors are only there for the money. They wouldn't do the job for the money. The money, non-executives don't get paid remotely in connection with the risk and the responsibility they take. But people think they're just there for the money.
Most valuable board ritual? Getting
together informally and not talking about business.
Favourite quote?
I only achieve simplicity with enormous effort.
Most significant professional insight?
The most difficult thing to say and the most impactful thing to say is I don't know the answer.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
Their impact goes well beyond their formal responsibility of governance oversight, but effectively as a mentoring, leadership, supporting, cohesive unit to drive an organization. It's not just about governance, it's about using the collective experience to drive an organization.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
The delay in changing someone on the executive team that was very valuable but being very disruptive.
And what was your lesson from that?
Take the action you know is right, even though it's going to be difficult.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
Lots of experience because I'm really old.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
There's no perfect answer to anything. In every meeting, listen more than you talk and have fun. Because if you don't enjoy it, don't do it.
So Douglas, that has been rich with insight. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Loved it. No problem at all, Ollie. All the best.
If you want to land your first paid board role, Nurole Plus can give you expert support to break into commercial roles and build the portfolio you want. As a listener, you get 10% off. Head to plus.nurole.com and use the code ENTER at checkout.